The courtroom was silent. The kind of silence that felt thick, heavy, and pregnant with tension. The kind that came before the gavel struck, before the judgment fell, before the rights and wrongs of men and women were decided under the towering columns of American justice. Karoline Leavitt sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped around a small, worn Bible, one that had been in her family for generations. The gold-lettered words Holy Bible glistened under the fluorescent lighting, a stark contrast to the cold steel of the courtroom. Across the room, Judge Raymond Sutherland leaned forward, his face set in an expression of firm authority. He was a man known for his no-nonsense approach, a veteran of the bench with decades of legal experience. But today he was making history in a different way. This court, he said, his deep voice cutting through the silence, does not recognize the authority of religious texts in a trial. Miss Leavitt, you are hereby ordered to remove the Bible from the defendant's table immediately. A murmur rippled through the room. The cameras from the major networks, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, zoomed in, capturing every movement. Reporters scribbled furiously. This was unprecedented. Karoline lifted her gaze, locking eyes with the judge. There was no anger in her expression, no frustration. Only resolve. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady, with all due respect, the Constitution guarantees my right to freedom of religion. My faith is not merely a belief, it is the foundation of my character. To ask me to remove my Bible is to ask me to deny the very values that define who I am. Judge Sutherland sighed. This is a court of law, Miss Leavitt, not a place of worship. We must separate church and state. Karoline shook her head. The Constitution says the government shall not establish a religion. It does not say we must erase faith from public life. The Founding Fathers swore their oaths on the Bible, Your Honor. Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, they all placed their hands on Scripture as they took their solemn vows. Are you telling me that what was good enough for them is not good enough for me? The courtroom buzzed again, whispers growing louder. The judge tapped his gavel. Order. A government attorney, Thomas Whitaker, stood up. He was a man of sharp suits and even sharper arguments. Your Honor, he interjected, Miss Leavitt is entitled to her beliefs, but the issue at hand is whether a government official, especially one as influential as the White House press secretary, should be permitted to use religious symbolism during official proceedings. This could set a dangerous precedent. Karoline turned to Whitaker. Dangerous precedent? Mr. Whitaker, are you suggesting that faith is dangerous? That a nation founded on Judeo-Christian values should now silence those who still uphold them? The judge raised a hand to quiet the debate. His face was unreadable. Miss Leavitt, this is my final ruling. The Bible must be removed. A tense pause filled the room. Then, slowly, deliberately, Karoline stood up. She picked up the Bible, not to put it away but to hold it high. The cameras flashed. Your Honor, she said, her voice unwavering. You may have the authority to remove this book from my table, but you will never remove it from my heart. A collective gasp filled the room. Even Judge Sutherland's expression flickered, just for a moment. And in that moment, Karoline Leavitt made history. The moment Karoline raised the Bible, the courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, and the frantic clicking of cameras filled the air. The scene was already broadcasting live across the country, and within seconds, millions of Americans were watching from their living rooms, office desks, and even their phones, gripped by what was unfolding. Judge Sutherland, visibly irritated, banged his gavel again. Miss Leavitt, this is a court of law, not a platform for religious grandstanding. If you do not comply, I will be forced to hold you in contempt. Karoline lowered the Bible but did not put it away. She turned to face the judge directly, her blue eyes steady and unwavering. Your Honor, I have sworn an oath to uphold the truth. If I am to speak honestly, then I must do so with the guiding principles of my faith. This Bible is not a prop. It is my moral compass. If you order me to remove it, you are not upholding the law, you are suppressing my First Amendment rights. The judge exhaled sharply, but before he could respond, Thomas Whitaker spoke up again. Your Honor, this discussion is veering off course. The issue here is whether the presence of religious texts in a government proceeding compromises neutrality. This court must not become a pulpit. Karoline turned to face him, her voice calm yet firm. Mr. Whitaker, if neutrality means stripping individuals of their deeply held beliefs, then we are not enforcing justice, we are enforcing secularism. And that is not what the Constitution intended. Outside the courthouse, the protests had already begun. Hundreds had gathered, waving American flags and holding up signs that read, "Faith is not a crime. We stand with Karoline. Jesus in the White House." On the other side of the street, counter-protesters had also assembled, chanting, "Separation of church and state," and "No religion in government." The story had ignited a cultural firestorm. News anchors dissected every second of the courtroom drama. Legal experts debated the implications, and social media was ablaze with divided opinions. In Washington, the White House press room was flooded with reporters demanding a response. President Trump, never one to shy away from controversy, addressed the nation himself. Standing at the podium, he adjusted his signature red tie and leaned into the microphone. "What we're seeing right now," he began, his voice measured, "is an attack on faith, an attack on freedom. Karoline Leavitt is one of the best press secretaries this country has ever seen, and she's being persecuted for holding a Bible in court. Folks, this is not the America we know. This is not the America that our founding fathers built." The crowd erupted in applause. "But let me tell you something," he continued. "We will not let this stand. We will fight for faith, for freedom, and for every American's right to believe in God without fear of government suppression. Mark my words." Meanwhile, back in the courtroom, the judge looked weary. He tapped his gavel once more, signaling for order. "Miss Leavitt," he said, "you are entitled to your beliefs, but this court has made its decision. Remove the Bible, or I will hold you in contempt." A heavy silence filled the room. All eyes were on Karoline. She took a deep breath. Then, without breaking eye contact with the judge, she did something no one expected. She stepped forward and placed the Bible directly on the judge's bench. The entire courtroom gasped. The judge's expression froze in shock. Karoline's voice rang out steady as ever. "If you believe this book has no place in your courtroom, then I challenge you, open it. Read it. And then tell me if justice can truly exist without it." Judge Sutherland stared at the book, his fingers hovering just above its cover. For the first time that day, he was speechless. Judge Sutherland's hand trembled slightly as it hovered over the Bible. The weight of the moment was undeniable. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail, the old, worn leather cover, the gold-embossed lettering, the subtle indentations on the pages from generations of fingers turning through them. The entire courtroom held its breath. Outside, the protests had grown louder. Police officers lined the steps of the courthouse, their presence a stark reminder of how deeply this case had divided the nation. Karoline Leavitt, standing tall before the bench, did not waver. She had faced tough crowds before as White House press secretary, standing at the podium answering relentless questions from an often hostile media. But this was different. This was about something bigger than politics. This was about faith, about freedom, about the soul of the nation. Judge Sutherland took a long breath, then pulled his hand away from the Bible without touching it. His jaw tightened. "This court," he finally said, his voice measured, "will not be pressured into religious advocacy. I stand by my ruling." "Bailiff, remove the Bible from my bench." Gasps echoed through the room. The bailiff hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. He glanced at Karoline, then at the judge, before finally reaching forward and hesitantly picking up the book. The moment his hands touched the Bible, a loud thump echoed through the courtroom, the sound of Karoline slamming her hands down on the table. "Stop." Her voice rang with authority, a voice sharpened by years of standing in front of cameras, defending policies, and never backing down. "This is not just about me. This is about every American who holds their faith close, who believes in something greater than themselves. You say you're upholding the law, Your Honor, but what you're really doing is rewriting the very principles this country was founded on." The judge exhaled through his nose, his patience clearly thinning. "Miss Leavitt, you are dangerously close to being held in contempt." Karoline took a step forward. "Then hold me in contempt," she challenged. "Arrest me. Let the world see what's happening here today. Let them see that in the United States of America, in the land of the free, a woman can be punished for refusing to renounce her faith in a court of law." The tension in the room was suffocating. The judge's face darkened. "You are testing the limits of this court's patience, Miss Leavitt." Karoline's lips curled into a slight smile. "No, Your Honor. I am testing its conscience." A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Some nodded in agreement. Others shook their heads in frustration. The moment was electric. Suddenly, the courtroom doors burst open. A court clerk rushed in, holding a piece of paper. He hurried to the judge's bench and handed it over. Judge Sutherland frowned as he read the paper. His expression darkened, and for the first time since the trial began, he looked uncertain. "What is it, Your Honor?" Karoline asked, tilting her head. The judge cleared his throat. "It appears," he said slowly, "that the Supreme Court has issued an emergency injunction regarding this case." Gasps filled the room. Karoline's heart pounded. An emergency injunction? That meant the highest court in the land was stepping in right now. "What does that mean?" one of the reporters whispered, frantically scribbling notes. "It means," another reporter muttered, "this just became a national constitutional crisis." Outside, the crowd exploded. Cheers and boos mixed together in a chaotic roar. The news was already flashing across television screens and social media. Police car light breaking news. U.S. Supreme Court intervenes in Karoline Leavitt case. Police car light. The fight had just escalated. And for Karoline, the real battle was only beginning. The Supreme Court's intervention sent shockwaves through the country. News anchors scrambled to interpret the legal ramifications, while political commentators framed the battle as a defining moment in America's culture war. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Judge Sutherland leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. He was now caught in the crosshairs of history. Karoline remained composed, though inside she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She knew this case was no longer just about a Bible in a courtroom. It was about the role of faith in American public life. The judge exhaled sharply and tapped his gavel. "Due to the Supreme Court's intervention, I have no choice but to adjourn this hearing until further notice. Court is dismissed." With that, he stood up and exited through the judge's chambers. The moment he was gone, the courtroom erupted. Some cheered, others shouted in frustration. Reporters rushed forward, microphones in hand, desperate for a statement. Karoline turned to face the cameras. She knew that every word she spoke now would be replayed across every major news network. She had to choose her words carefully. She took a deep breath. "This is bigger than me," she began. "This is bigger than a single courtroom. This is about whether faith still has a place in American life." The Supreme Court's decision to intervene shows that this is not just a trivial issue, it is a matter of national importance. A reporter from CNN stepped forward. "Ms. Leavitt, your critics argue that allowing religious texts in court violates the separation of church and state. How do you respond?" Karoline met his gaze. Separation of church and state was never meant to erase faith from public life. It was meant to prevent the government from imposing a religion on its citizens. But what we're seeing now is the opposite, government officials trying to erase religion from individuals. A Fox News reporter jumped in. "Do you see this as an attack on Christianity?" Karoline hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I see this as an attack on religious freedom. If we allow the government to dictate when and where faith is acceptable, we are surrendering a fundamental right that this country was built on." Meanwhile, at the White House, President Trump was watching the news unfold. He turned to his chief of staff. "Get me Karoline on the phone. Now." Minutes later, Karoline's phone buzzed. She stepped away from the cameras and answered. "Mr. President," she said. Trump's voice came through, strong and direct. "Karoline, you just took on the entire system and you're winning. This is bigger than anything we expected. The Supreme Court is moving fast on this. I want you to be ready." Karoline clenched her jaw. "Ready for what, sir?" A pause. Then Trump's voice came through, low and serious. "For the biggest fight of your life." The Supreme Court fast-tracked the case. An almost unprecedented move that signaled the gravity of the situation. Legal analysts debated day and night, politicians took sides, and social media platforms were ablaze with arguments. Hashtag Stand with Karoline and hashtag Separation of Church and State trended nationwide. Protests swelled outside the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. The nation was at a boiling point. Inside the grand halls of the Supreme Court, Karoline sat at the petitioner's table, her Bible once again by her side. Across from her, Thomas Whitaker and his legal team looked confident, but Karoline knew. This wasn't just a legal fight anymore. This was a battle for the soul of the nation. As the justices took their seats, Chief Justice Roberts cleared his throat. "We have heard the arguments. Today, this court will decide whether an individual can be prohibited from referencing religious texts in a court of law. Let us proceed." The arguments were fierce. Whitaker argued that allowing religious texts in court could lead to bias in legal proceedings. "If we allow the Bible today, what stops us from allowing the Quran? The Bhagavad Gita? This is a dangerous precedent." Karoline, standing before the justices, responded with unwavering conviction. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. If individuals are allowed to bring personal beliefs into this courtroom, if witnesses can swear upon the Bible, if judges can render decisions based on their conscience, then why am I being denied the right to hold my faith close? The justices listened intently. The weight of the moment was unmistakable. After hours of deliberation, the court recessed. The country waited in anxious anticipation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Chief Justice Roberts returned. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the packed courtroom, and began to read the ruling. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court rules that individuals have the right to bring personal religious texts into public legal proceedings. This court finds that prohibiting such an act is an infringement on personal liberties as protected under the First Amendment. A thunderous cheer erupted from Karoline's supporters. The decision had sent a clear message. Faith could not be erased from public life. Karoline exhaled, her heart pounding. She had won. Outside the courthouse, she stepped up to the podium as the press swarmed around her. "Today," she said, her voice steady, "America has reaffirmed what our founding fathers intended, that faith and freedom are not enemies, but allies. That in this great nation, no judge, no lawyer, no government entity can strip an individual of their right to believe." The crowd erupted in applause. Back at the White House, President Trump grinned as he watched the news. "She did it," he said to his advisors. "Karoline just made history." And indeed she had. The case would be remembered for generations, a turning point in the battle between faith and government. And as Karoline walked away from the podium, Bible in hand, she knew that the fight for religious freedom was far from over. But for today, victory belonged to the believers.